Okay, welcome to the third teaching and meeting of the Digital Indigenous Beading Circle. And tonight's session is about beading on a loom. So in previous sessions, we covered how to make a loom out of things from around your home. And last week we covered how to design your bead loom project. And tonight we're going to actually get started on beading, finally. So, I just want to mention a couple things before we get started. First of all, you need to gather your supplies, of course. And the supplies that you're going to need for tonight is a lot less than the past meetings we've had. But you need, obviously, your loom. You need your beads. You need, well, you don't need a mat, but it really helps to have a mat. Right now I'm using leather on here underneath my business tray or file tray bead loom that I made. And that's the reason why the mat is useful, is because it stops the beads sometimes from rolling around, or if it's on a plate, that's a little bit too hard of a surface, and sometimes it can bounce and go onto the floor. So having a mat is really useful when you're doing your beading. Obviously you need your needle and thread, and some scissors would help, and your pattern, whatever pattern it is that you're going to use. My pattern is on my phone, so I will just be going with what I remember the pattern to be. And I'm going to be using these really large beads so that everyone can see it a little bit better. I'm using a bright thread so that everyone can see that better, or as bright as I can. And I'm using contrasting color for the mat so that everything is much more visible. I'm going to be stringing up our warp threads here and over here. And yeah, so you should have your pattern with you, and just keep it whatever side you work with. And now that we have all our supplies, or we should have all our supplies here, I got my thread. Oh, I don't have my needles. Let me just grab those. Okay, this needle will work just fine. Because these are really large beads with a large hole. Pretty much any needle will work for these guys. But for your size 11 that you're going to be working on, if you got the beads from us, you can use any one of the needles you also got from us, except for there was a sewing needle included in that package. It probably won't work for your size 11 seed beads, so make sure you don't use that one. But so size 11, size 13, or size 16 beading needle should work for that. And of course, the beading thread we discussed last week. Even the needles. In fact, we discussed everything last week. So now we have all our supplies, and we're going to get started. Now, since I already know ahead of time, and oh, I should bring this up for you. So I did a calculation of how many beads you would need, and therefore how many rows you would need. So you can use this chart to get an idea. So for me, I'm going to do a bracelet that's 15 centimeters long. So I know that I need roughly, I can't actually see it from here. So I did a calculation of how many beads you would need, and therefore how many rows you would need. So you can use this chart to get an idea. So for me, I'm going to do a bracelet that's 15 centimeters long. So I know that I need roughly, I can't actually see it from here. Well, okay, I already know ahead of time that I need roughly, for this one, because of the size, I need 36 rows. I already figured that out ahead of time, but I can't, this is only for size 11, this chart. Okay, so So you can refer to that chart yourself to make sure that your pattern falls within that range. And if your pattern is too long, you can make it a little bit shorter and be selective about where you take out rows on either end of the bracelet, if it's a bracelet that you're doing, or where within your pattern, anywhere within your pattern. And if it's not long enough, you can add on a couple rows at either end. That often is used for your fixtures anyways, for your hardware if you're making a bracelet. So now that we have our supplies, we're gonna start threading the loom. And my design for this bracelet only is, oh, actually I do have that. Sorry, I forgot, I put it on the tablet. Okay, so here's my pattern. I'll make it a little bit smaller so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like in actual size. So it's just 2 colors. I just wanted to keep it simple for this demonstration. And it's 5 rows wide. Because it's 5 rows, or sorry, I should say 5 columns. These are rows. Going across this way is rows, and these are columns. So I apologize if I've confused people in the past. So it's going to be 5 columns wide, and that means I'm going to need 6 warp threads, because you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 for the outside there. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I want to make sure that I have enough thread that I can tie around this edge there onto the screw. So I'm going to go from there and then over extra there and add a little bit just to make enough room to wrap around. So now I'm, pardon me, there's 1 row. You can just go back and forth. So that's 2 strands of thread. This is the 3rd. This is the 4th. This is the 5th. And this will be our 6th and final strand for this bracelet. So I just tie a knot around that end. And 1 knot is should be sufficient. Because they're, so what I normally do is I split it down the middle, and since there's 6, it's easy to do. If there were 7, oh, looks like I forgot to cut the ends. To split it up so that they're all loose strands. It really helps to have them all loose strands. Okay, so I'm splitting it down the middle now. I should have had this mat off. But basically what I'm doing is hooking these loops here. But if you don't have loops because you cut every strand of thread, then you can just hook that part. So actually I'll hook that up just to show you what that looks like. So you hook it up around, probably would help if I so put it underneath there. Make sure it's center as best you can. And so now I have that coming down the center here. And I'm going to separate these threads. I know that there's 6, so I put a few over, a couple over, and then 1 right next to it. You always want to make sure you're holding on to all of them, even if you separate them a little bit for a second. while moving them. You want to make sure you're holding all of them because it keeps a nice even tension. Okay, move this one over a couple. And each time you have a new one, then you're going to bring it through and put them all together again. Again, this is nice even tension. Say you have 15 on this side and 15 on that side, it's going to take you a lot longer to line that up. So you just want to make sure that you're always being patient, holding every thread, taking one, moving it, putting it back in the bunch, taking one, moving it, putting back in the bunch. So once you have that lined up, still holding on to all the threads, not too tight because you're going to end up pulling your loom. And now I'm just going to make sure that I roughly have it across from the one, from that end. Trying to make sure that I'm parallel to my loom here. Your loom should be a pretty good guide. Unless you have a round loom, which would be different. All right. And you see how this slid over the way because I pulled it too hard. So you could anchor your loom. But this is more or less what I'm getting at, that you need to be somewhat gentle when you do these things. Gentle, but consistently holding on. Okay, so all of those are separated now. And I have a little bit of thread left here. And I actually forgot to put a screw in there. So what I'm going to do is just use, I'm probably just going to use a piece of tape. So I'm going to let that go very gently. Tape. Now, if I was using this loom, this is what I normally do at the end. I wrap it around the post at the other end, and then I tuck it in the side here, however it is that I can tuck it in so that it doesn't go loose. If you tie a knot, it's really annoying to untie again. Threads can be very annoying. And sometimes you need to move your work because this length here isn't very long. So I've had to move the work over. So you need to be able to adjust that kind of thing. But with this one, it's already way longer than I even need it to be. So using tape is perfectly fine. And I think for this one, what I'm going to do is just wrap it around first to make sure all the threads are in there. And I'm just going to tape it underneath. And that should hold it just fine. And if it doesn't, lining up 6 threads really isn't the end of the world. And now if there's about 30, that could be really annoying. I'm just going to put another one down there just to hold it in place. Extra little reassurance. Okay, so now we're ready. We're all strung up on our loom. And now I'm going to decide which side to start. The reason why I say this is because when you're doing this method, you have to be mindful of which end has the more thread. So this is where I started with threading up my warp threads. And this is where it ended up, where there's all that extra thread. So when I move my work, it's going to rotate and move this way, and I need to make sure I have enough thread. So you have to know which side that you're starting on. For this one, because I'm not moving any thread, it really doesn't matter. But I'm choosing to start at this end because I'll take the needle and I'll put it through here, hold this here, and put the beads back through again here. And so because my hand, and you'll see more in a minute, but because my hand is getting through here, I don't want this blocking it because if I turn it around, this will block it because this hand is always going to be going in underneath to hold the work. So that's why I'm choosing this set. So now what I do is I set up everything, and that includes getting thread. This is taking me a second to get that off there. Okay, so now we're going to set up everything. And I realize most of this is already set up here, as you see. But because, remember I said that you need a bead mat, or that it's really helpful. Now you're going to put out your beads, the beads that you're going to be using. And I predetermined these sizes, or I predetermined to make sure I had enough beads of each size. And so if I have it on the mat here, it's very easy to access. Now, one important thing to remember is I don't have any kids around, so I don't have to worry about this. In fact, I don't have anyone around during our current situation with COVID-19. And I don't have to worry about anybody hitting my beads and knocking them over, except for me. And if I do that, then that's my problem. But that's the kind of thing you want to be mindful of when you're setting up your space. And that's actually why I really like this tray, because it's a whole package right there, and you can put it away and take it out, and everything is out and ready for you. And less chance somebody's going to knock it, perhaps, but that's hard to say. Other times people might have their loom, like this loom set up, and then have a little bead mat here with their beads, or whatever handed side you are, and your other supplies. But this one, that's what I love about this one. So we're going to start out with this. Our beads are out. We're aware of whether anyone is going to cause us to lose our beads and knock them over. Now we're going to thread our needle. And the amount of thread you use, you have to think about a couple of things. More or less, is your thread going to tangle? Are you the kind of person who tangles the thread often? Or is it easy for you to keep your thread untangled? If you tangle it often, you probably don't want it to get too long. Waxing can help, and I know that Julie mentioned she waxes her threads. I'm not going to wax this one because I actually didn't pull out my wax. And this beading thread, it's smooth enough that it should work. So my vision isn't great, but I can still thread needles because I've been doing it for so long. But I want to point out that if you do have trouble threading your needle, you can use a needle threader, but sometimes that doesn't work for some beading needles because the eye is too small. Now this eye is extremely small, so I'm not sure it would have worked for that one. And then you can also use a magnifying glass of any kind. I brought one home with me, but it turns out I didn't need it this time. And then if you are not worried about threads tangling, you can make it, almost 2 meters, 1.5 meters, 2 meters long. Because you're going to be going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's going to require a lot of thread. Mind you, most often you'll need to thread it, create another needle with thread. You'll need to, what am I trying to say here? You'll run out of thread and you'll need more, basically is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we have ours threaded, and we'll show you how, when you do run out, how to change that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor this end of my thread, because I don't really want to tie a knot, because then I'd have to untie it again. This end piece will end up being woven in. And sometimes I like to have it a little long, because I like to have enough in case I need to do something with it. Meaning if I need to add beads to it or something like that. Or if I need to fortify the end. So I'm going to anchor that down. Oh, where am I going to go? I guess I'll grab a piece of tape this time as well. Mind you, I don't know how well it'll hold a single strand. But maybe if we put it through there twice, that'll slow it down from trying to come through. So I'll anchor that down there. Seems to be good. Okay. So now I'm going to show you how to read your pattern. In this case, my pattern has numbers on it. If you're using a paper pattern, you might want to put your own numbers there. And so let's see, what do I have here? I have 36 rows for this one. Again, it's because these are huge beads. Yours will probably be, you know, around 70 rows, somewhere around 70, depending on the size of your wrist. Less if you have tiny wrists, and if you need extra room for the bracelet hardware, if it is a bracelet that you're making. Okay, so there's my pattern, and I'm just going to start at row 1. I realize the 1 is a little bit down there. Actually, I could probably make this really large. So this is super easy. I grab 5 beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See, my first row is all white. And I bring the thread underneath. This is the weft thread, and these are the warp threads. And I bring my weft thread underneath my warp threads. Line them up into each spot. See how that isn't lined up there? That's 2 and 1, so I gotta move that over. Oh, it's a little hard to do the first row. Sometimes I'll do it a little further up and slide it down so that I have room for my hand. And so it's all underneath, and I hold it up, pressing up, but not too hard on these threads. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go through the top part. So I'm going over all of these threads. So I'm just going to move this beads here for a second and just show you. So this is underneath, and all the beads will be there, and then I'm going to bead on top. I'm going to pull it through on top. You want to make sure that you're not going underneath here, because it's just going to undo. So I'm going to line this up again. And I'm making sure I go over top. Go through all of those. And there's your first row. I'm bringing it down here. And so I pull this, but I'm not going to pull it too hard. Partly because you'll see that it brings these together, but also because it's my first row. It's just going to get loose anyways. So I pull it just to see, make sure it's all lined up all right. Yep, that'll work. It'll go loose in a second, and we'll have to work out the tension as we go. But that's our first row. So see how I let that go, and it starts to slacken a little bit. Now, about counting your beads. This is easy because there's 5. But if there's 28 across, you might want to start to note your center line. And occasionally what I'll do is, if I need help with that, at least in this digital format, and if I have paper graph paper, I'll put it in lead. I'll highlight it in lead in these lines, but I can't do that here. So what I would do here to show my center line to help keep me on track is I would just put it in here, knowing that that's not a bead that I use, knowing that that is the base color. In this case, white is, or I should say matte crystal is my background color. That's hopefully going to set off that gold. It is a matte gold, but hopefully it's going to set it off nicely. So that's what I'll do sometimes. Another thing I'll do, let me undo this for a second. Another thing I'll do is, oops, undo, is if I'm having difficulty between 1 and 10, sometimes I'll do a marker of a 5, like 5 down, to make sure that I can see 5 in between, just so that it's easier to keep track of my pattern. But you got to make sure, if you're going to do this, that it's a bead that you're not using, that you don't have out in your supplies, and that you know which bead it actually refers to. But that sometimes helps keep me on track. For if you're just starting out, you know, anywhere between, you know, 3 columns to, you know, maybe even up to 20 should be fine to handle. Once you get into the larger bracelets, this wasn't so bad, and I like repetitive patterns, So it wasn't that hard, but this is 27 wide. So sometimes took me a minute, but in this one, I did put a center red line to help keep me on track. But something like this, that was easy. I think it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. That's 14 wide. That was actually pretty easy to do. And sometimes I didn't even need to look at the pattern. In this case, the pattern's so simple, I'm pretty sure, because it's 2 and 2 and 2 and it just moves. It's a pretty easy one, so it won't be that hard. I might not even need to have this on the whole time. But if you are using a digital one, you can also print it if you...
Now I'm going to move on to the second row, and in this case it's all white again. And let's just do that really quickly. Demonstration how to do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Underneath. Hold those there with your hand. See how that important that is, that space underneath. That's why when I mentioned the cardboard box one last week, you'll want to cut out the side here and here, because or at least on the one side, because you want to be able to get your hand inside. Pull that over top. So I threaded it, sorry, back again over top. And pull it taut. Tight. See, my threads are loose. This is the reason why tape is not great. It'll work, but it's not great. So I had to tighten that up again. Okay, so that's the second row. It's a little messy. We're tightening it up a little. Gonna move on to the third. I realize that this might seem boring, but actually let's ignore the third. Let's go right to a little bit more than just the white. So in this case, so let's pretend there's already another one there. So now we're on the fourth row, and you pick up, you want to make sure that you're reading it on the correct, from one side to the next. So I'm always going to read my pattern from left to right, starting at 1 here and going forward. If I move this around and the pattern wasn't even, and I moved from right to left as opposed to left to right or something like that, it can mess me up. So you want to make sure you're always going from the same side and having your pattern facing the same way. And you just count. So I'm on the fourth row. 2 white, 1, 2, 3 for the gold, 4, 5. Move this over so you can see a little bit better. Underneath. Put them in place. Over top. There we go. Looks like that other thread didn't really help much, did it? That other piece of tape. So that's our third row. I'm going to do just one more row before I show you how to switch threads. So now I'm on that row. So white, gold, 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 white. That white seems a little bit too big of a diameter, so I'm going to choose a different one that suits this row a little better. Well, that one looks a little better. Underneath. Over top. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pretend like I made a mistake here and didn't notice. that I didn't catch the top. I just want you to see what that looks like. Or it didn't go over top, but I ended up underneath. So let's say I didn't notice. It's hard with the large beads, you can really tell. But with the small beads, you might not notice. And you go through, and sometimes you can go through a whole row, like 27 or 30, and you think it's fine. See, looks fine. Pull it through. Oh, there goes that bead. So now you know that's what happens when you don't catch the top row. But I'm going to back it up a little. Oops. To fix that row. And once I'm done that row, I will cut the thread so you can see how we're going to change our threads up. Nothing to the needle. Fix this there. And add that one bead that dropped. Let's say that one's it. Oop. Pulled it too hard, so it's loosening up the threads. That's my fault. But if you loosen your threads, you really will need to tighten them, or else your work will end up rather sloppy. Okay, so that was our officially 5th row, but in the pattern, but it's our 4th row on this. Oh, tighten that up again because I pulled it. And so now I'm going to show you what happens when you run out of thread. Oh my gosh, I've been beading for like 20 rows, 30 rows, and that's all I have left. At that point, you might not eat, like your thread might even be a little bit longer because it becomes difficult to pick up beads and move it around if you don't have enough thread to allow your needle to get down. But you want to have a good amount left over if you can. And all you do is start another thread. So let's say it was this one. And it's threaded. You grab the other end. You grab the end of your new thread. And you just, what I typically do is I do it all the way at the end there to maximize the amount of thread. And I do one knot, and then I do a second knot further down so that it's a good backup. But you don't want it too far down because then the thread might not get hidden in the row, the tag ends. So I have a knot here and a knot there. So they're not too far apart. And I'll just leave that end there and we'll see what happens to it. And then what I do is I start beading again. Now it's going to be a while before that end shows up to be to end up getting tagged in there. So I'm just going to go all the way down here so you can see what it looks like when it's done, and just tie it off there. Just for this demonstration. So that's all the way down there. Let's pretend there's 2 there. I snip, so I have at least some there. You want to make sure you don't snip your new thread. You want to put that out of the way. And now I'm going to start my next row, which is 2 gold, 1, 2 gold, 3 for the white, 4 for gold, and 5 gold as well. Just go underneath. You'll see that end is hanging out there. Just ignore it for now. Go over top. And if your thread is too thick, you might not be able to do this because the knots will get in the way. But If it seems a little resistant, you know, try and push it through, and hopefully that'll work. So I'm tightening that a lot. See how it messes with my warp thread? So then I have to loosen it up a bit. Okay, and I will go another row before I do any snipping because I don't want to snip my original thread. So the next row is gold, oops, gold, white, 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 and one gold underneath. And over top. And there we are. So when you're done your bracelet, you'll end up cutting those ends off. I tend to leave them until the end because I'm always afraid that I might end up snipping something that I didn't mean to, like the weft thread. Now you'll see that it's a little weird and distorted. This row is wider and this one's narrower. That's because that bead is really narrow. Had I checked them all, I probably would have chosen something more uniform, but I just went ahead and grabbed them for this demonstration. But you have the idea that it's kind of messy when they're uneven in size, and it's more dramatic in these larger beads. Now another thing that you will notice is I keep sliding my work down there. One thing I like, well, everyone wants to do in a loom, is to keep this tucked down, your beads as close as they can be without forcing it so much that you're causing too much tension on your threads. And so you just want to move these down so that they're all touching. And what I like to use for that is either something like a library card, or I have another, there it is. I made these little guys just by cutting it out of a cupcake package where all the cupcakes came in, folded it over. It's a nice smooth edge there. And I just used this card and slide it in there. You could use your library card or credit card, or I guess their Presto cards aren't being used for much right now. And slide it in place. So that's basically all you do, and you keep doing your rows until you're done your pattern. Today we're not going to cover any of the finishing, but I do want to show you, if you do have a loom and you need to move your work forward, how you do that. So you have, at least with this loom, and other looms will have it as well, where you can loosen and tighten your threads. The other loom, this loom that we were using, you know, that's a makeshift homemade one, and it was already the length I needed it, so we didn't have to worry. But with this one, this isn't long enough for the bracelet, so I have to move the finished part down, which I've already done here, and allow these threads to come through. And I think what I'm going to do is put this mat here so you can see a little bit better. And all you need to do is loosen the one end that you're going to roll. So I've loosened that end, and you'll probably see this. Oh, well, that fell right off. Well, that's perfect. Now I can show you how to do that. So that just fell right off. Actually, I can hook that up after. Sometimes this wireframe can be a little annoying. That's why I didn't create this little bend thing in the homemade coat hanger ones. Because if you don't have a good wing nut, this one's great, but this end is terrible. And so we'll put that back up. I have to put that around. I'm going to hold that for a second. Okay, so I'm going to remove these threads from this little nook. I just wedged them in there. Now they're loose. I'm unwinding, and I've loosened all of that. So I wouldn't normally take the whole thing off at this moment, and but I do it to show you how easy it is just to put it back on again. So I'm going to go around this way because it has to be wrapped around. Just making sure that it's somewhere in the center. And it is. Now, in this case, now that it's hooked up, what I would do is I would loosen this, roll it like that, and then tighten up that wing nut again. So now we've rolled it a bunch. It's wrapped around quite a bit. You want to make sure that you have your weft thread out and off to the side. See how loose that all is? We'll fix that in a minute. Don't worry about it. The last couple of rows will be loose. So we're going to go back to our threading method of grabbing the two in the center. One on the side. Place them. Add one at a time. 2 and 3. So if it falls off, you don't have to panic at all. You know, you have to tidy it up when it comes back on again, but not all is lost. Everything is fixable. Okay, so I have all my threads in place. I wrap them around a couple of times, just like we did at the beginning. And in this loom, I like to wedge it in there. And now you're ready to go. It's all loose there, so I'm going to pull the thread gently and keep moving it towards me to make sure that they're nice and tight in there. Pull that tight once it's all in place. And you'll notice that if you pull it really tight, you see how it messes up all those threads there? Sometimes that, if it's a really wide bracelet, it'll stay like that when you're done. And in which case you have to just sort of loosen up that row just a little bit so that the threads are nice and even again. And then I would just start beading again for this one until I'm done. And you're going to go until as far as you need to go for your pattern. And you want to make sure that you have at least, you know, that much thread at the end. So if you only have a couple of rows left to go and you need new thread, get the new thread because you do need to make sure that you have enough thread. Let me just double check that I've covered everything in the slideshow. And so yeah, the tension of everything about your threads, it's all about tension. In fact, any craft or anything in life, it seems, is all about tension. And this is no different. So you want to make sure that these have a good tension, not too tight, not too loose, just like I showed you. And you want to make sure that this one has a good tension too. This is going to take a little while to get used to. Some people are natural with their thread tension and they can feel the balance really easily, and other people might end up having a very loose part of the pattern and then a very tight part of the pattern. That's bound to happen, and as you bead longer and do this more often, you'll understand your threads better and you'll understand your beads better. You'll understand all of it better just by the physical memory that you absorb from doing the activity. It ends up working out great. And I believe, yeah, that should be everything. I think I've covered everything. So if you have any questions or if I missed something, please post it below, or we will be talking about it shortly, or in the chat. Thank you for joining me, and take care.